Right, well, let's kick off. Oh, excuse me, didn't mean to do that. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. My name is Stuart Maister, and the next 45 minutes, we're really going to look at one question, which is, what are you doing with your relationship capital? So often in normal times, we spend our relationship capital unconsciously. We spread it around. We're not clear. We just spend it with the people that we're already engaged with. This, we think, is a moment to be much more conscious in considering where are we going to invest this limited relationship capital now, and in particular, as we emerge into what we're calling the new normal. I'm Stuart Maister, and with me, I'm the joint MD of Mutual Value. With me is Kevin Vaughan-Smith.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and welcome to sunny Buckinghamshire. People said to me the other day, are you in a sauna? No, I'm not in a sauna. This is a garden room where I'm self-isolating. So a little bit about me. I'm fascinated in the power of relationships, and specifically how one leverages trust to build relationships which add value to both parties.
And my background, as many of you know, is as a TV and radio reporter. I was a journalist, but I've run a bunch of communications businesses over the last number of years. And what really interests me in the context of what we're discussing is that building the right story creates the new reality. So get the narrative right, both in terms of the way in which you intend to build relationships and the narrative of the relationship, often co-created, and the reality is transformed as a result. And that's what we really one of the things we want to talk about today. Bit of housekeeping, if I may. Firstly, we are recording this, so please bear that in mind when you're speaking. Other people will see this too. Secondly, this is meant to be a discussion, not simply a presentation. So at the right moment, I'm going to open all the mics. Please feel free to come in and share your thoughts. However, in the meantime, if you want to share any comments, put some thoughts in as we're talking or as other people are talking, put it in the chat box. We think, let's not use the Q&A. We're not asking for questions. We're as much interested in what you've got to say as in what we've got to say, to be honest. So please do that as we go through it. So, but we will also, at various points, invite individuals to share their experiences. So we might just suggest that because we intend this to be a workshop, as I say, not simply a presentation. So without further ado, let's get into the first session. And what I want to do is ask you a question. And hopefully you can see that poll now. In many organizations, most of your profit comes from a minority of your customers. It's not always the case. So in your case, just give a quick thought, please, to where your profits come from. Your profits, not your revenue. Is it, what proportion of your customers do that come from? Just vote now, if you would, please. I'll give you a moment.
Sure, I can't see the poll, but that just may be a peculiarity.
Well, actually, the fact that no one's voting means that may be true of other people's. Let me relaunch that poll, because the relaunch poll one, with a bit of luck, you'll be able to see that now. Okay?
Now I can see it.
Right, well, that may mean others can see it too. So let me ask that question again. You can see it there. 80% of your profit, where does it come from? Just vote now, if you would, please. Okay, keep going. Got another few of you to vote. I'll give you another few seconds to do that. The reason I'm asking this is, as we go through the first part of this section, which Kevin's going to take us through, please think about those accounts that are giving you most of your profit, and obviously the other accounts that maybe don't contribute so much to the profit. And as he talks about relationships, think about where they sit in the model he's going to share. I'll give you another few seconds. Still got a few of you to vote, but the rest of you, those of you who haven't voted now, you've missed your chance, because I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So actually what we've got here, hopefully you can see those results now, is you've got half of you saying 40 to 50% of your clients contribute 80% of your profits, which is a pretty good spread actually for most businesses. In many organizations, as you'll know, it's more of an 80-20 rule, and maybe even in some cases 90-10. 10% providing 90% of profits. I've worked certainly with one organization where that was true. So please think about that as we go through this section. Kevin.
Yeah, so we're talking about relationship capital, which is the sum of the effort that your organization can put into building relationships with other organizations. And it's not simply if you have them, what your sales or account manager puts in place or your business developer puts in place. This is the total of effort that you as a business can put into that relationship. So a really simple model that is out there and we find very powerful is this one. On the x-axis, looking at impact on the client's profit or their performance, not on your impact on your client's performance or profit. And then on the y-axis, how easy is it for somebody to substitute away from you? And that gives you these 4 boxes. Clearly, if you're having low impact on profit or performance and you're easy to substitute, well, that would be where, up until recently at least, toilet paper would have been anything you buy on a regular buying process. That's where the vast majority of goods that come into our businesses and that we sell fit into the commodity area, but that's where most of the work is. Shouldn't necessarily be where most of the relationships are. Above commodity, where you have high impact, but you're easy to substitute, you may well be delivering some kind of expertise or service, but you're not differentiated. So if the client wishes to, they can move you out quickly if they feel they can get a better deal or if they feel they can get an even better performance from switching to somebody else. So maybe a significant part of your business, but it may be one that you are at significant risk over. On the bottom right-hand corner, where you have low substitutability, but you also have high substitutability, sorry, let me start again, it's the sunshine here. Where you have low substitutability, it's difficult to move you out, but actually you're not making much impact on the client's profit or performance. And we say this is managed risk here because the risk you're managing is the client says, you know what, I can actually live without this service completely. It's not having the impact on my business, or I'll find some other way to do it which doesn't use this service. So it's not a competitive threat, it's a do nothing or a substitute threat of some other kind. And then finally, in the top right-hand corner, we've got this idea that says you're really making an impact on their business and you're difficult to substitute for some reason. And we call that the partnering box, because actually, if you're going to work here, the best way to work here is to collaborate with people. And we're going to talk more about that. So look, we spend a lot of time in the market. We talk to lots of clients. And here's a pretty common kind of map that we see. And let me explain it. The size of the circle is a representation of the amount of your relationship capital you invest in a relationship. And we haven't named these relationships here, but you could. So you invest a certain amount of your total capital in these relationships. Lots of them in the commodity area is what we find. People spend enormous amounts of time coming up with initial RFP processes, price checking processes, service delivery quality, SLAs, you name it, and people spend masses and masses of their relationship capital setting up commodity deals and then monitoring commodity deals, in some cases beating up their suppliers in commodity deals or the client beating us up in commodity deals, keeping us on the straight and narrow. We spend an enormous amount of commodity relationship capital trying to be good citizens. It's a huge amount of effort for something that's not making a lot of difference to them or possibly to us. Then we spend a little bit of time on leverage. We're terrified that the competition is going to get in, so we spend time up there thinking we've got to protect ourselves, even though we know there may be better alternatives the client could pick up on. What we don't see is people managing risk. They ignore the fact, because they're making good money themselves, typically in the bottom right corner, they ignore the fact that the client should be asking the question, why are we doing this? Why are we using anybody to do this? It's making very little impact. And so they ignore that. And then the final one we've got is this partnering thing. And you know, we hear so many people say, oh yes, we want to be trusted advisors, we want to be trusted partners, we want to be this. But actually, especially when we're dealing with high value projects, IT projects, big service projects, most of the people we work with tend to sell expertise. They tend to sell what they do best. And actually that risks driving them into a commodity line, because to be in the partner space, you have to be prepared to have broad-based conversations. You have to be really interested about what the client's seeing, and you have to be able to bring more of your business to that environment. And people feel uncomfortable there. And I spent the last 15 years and 5 in it, particularly with professional services, where getting people to really partner broadly was the biggest issue, and we simply weren't seeing enough effort going into there. So here's a little exercise I'd like you to do. This model, I hope, makes sense. I hope you can see the way the circles work. I'd like you to do is, hopefully you've got a piece of paper or something near you. I'd like you to think now for 30 seconds, where would I place some of our relationships? And think of some of your important relationships which might go in the top right and some which might go in the bottom left, and draw a circle equivalent to the size of the proportionate effort you're putting into the amount of your relationship capital you're spending. So let me give you a few seconds, some in the top right, some towards the bottom left, size of circle, think of a few relationships. 30 seconds.
Now, let me just...
Now look, Stuart, I was going to say, the point about this as you finish up on that work is that we believe that as you come out of the coronavirus, you want to start thinking about, where do I want to invest this very critical resource? I think I saw a report a little while ago from PwC, and PwC said that your relationships, your trust, is your biggest asset. It's just your least visible and least managed. And one of the things I'd like you to start considering is, how could I start to assess my relationships capital? And as I come out, how can I make sure that I'm investing it heavily in this area?
Now, you'll see there that what we've made that graphic do is where we suggest it goes, which is from the bottom left to the top right. That's obviously where you want to be. I want to suggest 2 ways you can do that, and then open this up for a discussion about what comes up for you. There are 2 ways to do this. One is to consciously identify which are the customers for whom you're already in a brilliant partnerial position, because your service offering is in a really strong place. You're difficult to substitute, as Kevin described, or you have a superb relationship and you definitely act in a partnerial way. And are there other clients that fit the same profile that you could be building your relationship with? The second way to do it, though, is many organizations, whether you're selling technology, professional services, whatever it is, actually the thing you do, the thing you're selling, is substitutable. Other people can do it as well, or as in some cases maybe even better than you, who knows? So how do you build that partnerial position? How do you make yourself more difficult to substitute? Then it's about the relationship. So if you're actively building relationship with those clients, even though the service you're providing, the product you're selling is substitutable, you've taken in totality, the relationship you're providing is much more difficult to substitute, because you have a trusted position. They know exactly who you are. You know their business very well. You've invested in understanding their business, their needs, and you're working as a genuine partner, not simply as a supplier of services. Those are 2 ways to move from the bottom left to the top right. And at this point, we just would love to hear from you. I've made all of you able to speak, so you can unmute your mic if you want to speak, or put your little hand up next to it if you choose to. But who would like to share perhaps what comes up in your own organisation or what you're seeing in the marketplace? Edward, I see you.
Edward,
yeah, hi. So I think, if I go back literally 20 years, and I think of a relationship I had with IBM Global Services, and the opportunity to become a partner. And it was really around, I think, demonstrating to them a real passion for their business. I think in the early stages, it was around sort of baby steps and just strong delivery, strong communication, availability, really asking the right questions. And I sort of fast forward to today, and I think of the past 10 years, having sort of spent time really working on my own in a small business. The value of those relationships are so important to your revenue and profit, that maintaining that kind of approach has really kind of kept me focused on always wanting to be in that box. Long-term relationships, sustainable revenue, an interest in the subject matter, and also being very clear that, what do they want from you? So that two-way communication. And it goes back to the first step I took with IBM 20 years ago. And it's put me in, because it served me quite well. But it can be hard. And I think sometimes it involves showing some vulnerability, not being shy and have a fear of saying to a client how important they are. I mean, as in any relationship, it's showing some vulnerability too.
I think it's a great point, particularly right now. Ed, do you want to just share with people what you do, so people understand the perspective?
Sure. So, I mean, to all intents and purposes, I have two jobs. One is I'm a headhunter in the infrastructure and advisory space, so transport, digital, but I also help run a small technology startup in the data analytics, real-time data, real-time information in the transport sector.
Great. Thank you. That's a really good point.
There's lots of other people out there. I wonder if we could encourage some other comments, because
Stuart and it's Frank here. Kidebro from Skanska. I can't quite see who else is on the call, so I'm not sure how many people I'm speaking to. But just by way of introduction, I'm the defence lead for Skanska in the UK. Yeah, very interesting, and I guess I suppose this is an observation, just as you were talking there, and reflecting, as I have been a bit on the current situation over the last couple of weeks. It's interesting that there were lots of blobs down in the commodity corner to begin with, and I think that's kind of a reflection of where we've got to as a planet, really, in that a lot of services have become very commoditized, because we've been in that luxurious position almost where you can commoditize lots of things. There doesn't need to be a lot of mutual dependency, because we rely on global suppliers, we rely on things being there, such as transport systems and infrastructure systems and people available to do things, and so we are able to commoditize lots of things. And I think the reaction to that will be that we've discovered through COVID-19 that actually there is an element of mutual dependency that we do need, because things can come along that undermine a lot of those givens, and we're seeing that in spades at the moment. Lots of things that we just accepted were available to us only a few weeks ago are not. And so I can see that lots of organisations, both customers and service providers, are going to rapidly want to move into the partnering space, because they've seen that the unthinkable actually can happen. I suppose my observation is that whilst we may see a shift from commoditization into partnering, the back of my mind, I'm thinking actually what people really might be doing is managing risk. And so we may see a move towards partnering is actually managing risk masquerading as partnering. And it's how we differentiate between which are true partnerships and which are partnerships that are more tactical around managing risk, but as I say, masquerading as partnership.
If I can comment on that, Frank, I think interesting that in a true partnership, what we're seeing is that with a shared ambition, then the management of risk becomes a very upfront discussion rather than about how you move margin about. And I do think that risk could be managed differently, but that's perhaps a more detailed discussion today. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a final comment?
Frank, I think the points you're making are really interesting. I work with a small defence consultancy, actually, who have built their business very much on long-term partnership-based relationships. And I've been talking to, and they're in good shape right now. I mean, obviously, it's a tough time, and a lot of sites have been closed for all the obvious reasons. They continue to work in nuclear, which is obviously, you can't just walk away from that. But interestingly enough, I've been talking to sort of people in the recruitment business and the commoditized sector of it, where it was the sort of, shuffle lots of CVs out in all sorts of directions, hoping that, if I throw enough mud, something's going to stick. It's a long journey to go from commodity to partnership. And I think, playing the long game and when I set out on my own, I left what was Whitehead Man became Corn Ferry in 2010. And, I'd always sort of thrived around being close to my clients because, a lot of them were friends. But the 10 years since then, when I've been on my own and, really investing heavily in the partnership approach, because, once those relationships are built, and if you continue to build trust and service it, they stick. Whereas in a time like today, there's probably 100 people I could pick up the phone to and just have a "how are you" conversation. Whereas if I'd sort of gone down the commodity route and just to spray and pray, I'd be sitting staring at a blank screen right now because I wouldn't have any real relationships.
Ed, I'm going to just cut across you because I've got a couple of people who put their hands up, and I want to give everyone a chance because we're limited on time. But thank you. Not at all. No, it's really interesting. Caroline, do you want to come in there? Just unmute. I think you are unmuted, so please go ahead. If we can keep all our contributions to up to a minute, that'd be really helpful to get around people. Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I just wanted to reflect back on what Frank was saying about the managing risk or the partnering masquerading as I'm saying it the wrong way around. The managing risk masquerading as partnering. I won't give specifics, but where I'm working, I'm the client in a government organisation, and we've set up a relationship management program with some of our suppliers, which we've tabled as it's more collaborative, more strategic partnering. But it's all about, at the moment, we've been going about 12 to 18 months, and at the moment it's all about what we can get from the supplier. What information and intelligence can you give us that's going to help us manage risk? And I'm really trying to push, or have been trying to push, that actually this needs to be two-way, and we need to be giving the supplier the opportunity to see what they can get from us. And interestingly, and we're what can be labelled as a monopsony. We're a client. There's nobody else like us, so the suppliers have to work with us. And interestingly, in the recent, with what's going on at the moment, we've just yesterday ran an engagement council that normally is face to face, and this time it was over the phone, obviously. But we had 195 people on the call, and you're only allowed 1 or 2 people from each supplier. And that was the highest number of people we'd ever had at that engagement council. And I think people are desperate for that communication and that engagement at this time. And I said to our team afterwards, this is a perfect opportunity to really start building those relationships and leveraging that sort of need for communication and collaboration and making the most of it. But you're right, it's a tough slog, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight.
Question for you, which I don't think you have time to answer now, because I've got one other hand that went up I wanted to go to, is whether, because you've made a brilliant point, this is such a great time in this kind of intensity of need for communication to pivot into a much more a collaborative relationship-based approach. But The question for you, I think, is the confidence you will have that actually that's what the organisation will do when it emerges. Everyone needs each other right now.
Yeah.
But will, and this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to suggest, this is the make this a long-term change, not just an immediate kind of grant need. Kevin Condren had his hand up. Kevin, you had your hand up, and I want to come to you because we've got limited time. Kevin, do you want to make a point?
Yeah, I'll just make two very brief points and really build on a couple of things that Edward said. First of all, I see in some of the relationships that we have with larger clients that we will have this kind of picture across a client where we will have different relationships with different people within a client in different stages. And the other thing that struck me, as Edward was talking as well, is that there are implications here in terms of where you start with a relationship and moving from one box to another in order to get to that partner stage. There are implications and tactics that are required in order to move from, say, you start at commodity level and trying to get to partner level. So thinking about those different stages that you need to move to implies different tactics, different approaches, different strategies.
Kevin, that's an excellent point. I think we're suggesting that now is the time. As many companies emerge, they're going to be thinking about where to spend our all sorts of capital, but relationship capital is one of them. And I think that leads us to another poll, doesn't it, Stuart?
It does, and I'm just trying to find the poll thing. Oh, there we are. Let me leave this. As I'm going to the next poll, let me just, Kevin, do you want to just share where you're from so people understand again where you're from? So
sure. Right now I'm from Connecticut and the sun is just beginning to rise here. So I'm working for IBM and I lead global marketing for their industrial sector business, which covers things like automotive, aerospace defense, electronics, metals, mining, oil and gas.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, so look, yeah, did you want to introduce this poll?
You can introduce it.
So,
Stuart, can I just ask a quick question before we move on?
Yeah, do. Go for
Sorry. So you're talking about moving from, say, the commodity box up into the partnering box. Am I right in thinking that for that to happen, as well as the relationship changing, because you're moving from substitution difficulty being fairly low to fairly high, that would also depend on how the market moves and how many suppliers or clients you have in that particular market, and to enable you to do that substitution?
Indeed, but it raises two critical points. Thank you so much for asking the question. One is the point I made earlier, which is if you're focused on a relationship, on aligning yourself around the customer, even if the market for services has changed, as long as you're capable, we'll talk about capabilities in a moment, as long as you're able to respond to that in terms of your capabilities, your protection, your substitution protection is the relationship you have, not the services you provide, unless you're doing something so unique that no one else can do it, and if you are, well done. But the relationship is seeking to build that soft wall, if you like, around the client, so that they really look to you to provide the new services as the market changes. And if you can't do that, you're in trouble. But most organizations of any size are able to do that. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully, that's a great question. Hopefully people have seen this poll and they can start to answer it. My experience, and I used to run, Kevin, I used to run government for digital equipment when digital equipment was the second largest computer company in the world, behind your good selves. And I know we never, ever mapped our relationships. And that's a sad reflection on the way I ran the business. But now I'm working with clients, and I know it's a very uncommon thing to do. So I'd ask you to just tell us honestly, and this is anonymous, when did you last sit down as a business and strategically review your clients' base for the relationships? And Stuart, you can see when it's closed, and I can't.
No, we've still got half. So so strategic review of your client base, and we'll talk about the relationship. Just if you wouldn't mind, I've got a few more of you just to vote. If you would take the trouble to do that, be really helpful. Thank you. Give you another couple of seconds. If not, you've missed your chance. So a few more to vote. No. Okay. Going. Okay. So let's share the results. Let me share those results. So actually, what we're saying, assume you can all see that, quarter of you in the last 3 months, there's a bunch who haven't voted, so this is a limited poll sample, but those who voted, you've all done some kind of review. The question here is about, in that review for thought, is relationship quality part of the way in which you're doing that review? Was it reviewed in terms of revenue, profit, share of wallet, growth potential, that sort of thing, which of course is important, but also quality of relationship? Because some of your customers who you in theory make money from may be dragging, and no one likes working with them, and if you really map the time you're spending, you may be losing money on them actually, because of the poor relationship. So quality of relationship, we're suggesting, is one of the ways in which you decide who to work with. Kevin, do you want to move on to the next?
Yes. So, I mean, what we're suggesting, that relationship capital is a limited asset, and you spend it in two directions as a business, and the other directions with your suppliers or your supply chain. And you can use exactly the same mapping to look at where are you spending your time, and again, what we seem to spend so much time on in business is the commodity end, all these RFP processes and all the supply management processes. And we don't spend as much time, and this goes back, I think, to something that Frank was saying about, is it true partnership or is it about risk management? I suspect at this time, Frank, you're right. Most of it is in managing risk, not in true partnership. And that's something, again, that we consider change. I would add a third dimension to this, which is how much of the relationship capital from the other side is being spent on relationships with you. Now that's the next step that we would go to, is when you've mapped your relationship capital, you engage with those important relationships to test how much of their capital are they willing to spend with you. But let's leave that for another session. So clearly what we're saying is the opportunity post-COVID is to think about, how am I going to build true partnerships that really make value for both of us? And Stuart, I think you're going to just share our little model of how you do that.
And I will do just one point on this before we do that. It may be that many of your suppliers are commodities or are being commodified. And Caroline, you mentioned you come from a big buyer of government services for government. Yeah. Classically, procurement tries to commodify things. The result is a win-lose mentality, master servant, all that stuff, instead of seeking to create mutual ambition about what you can achieve together. So this is about supply chain management, having not just warm words about partnerial approach, but an actual approach that in your decisions and behaviors that's genuinely partnerial. Let me share, as Kevin suggested, our thinking on how you do this. And those that were on our web seminar last week will recognize this and have had conversations. You'll know this is a core way of thinking, but for those that not, let me spend just a moment on it. How do you then design these relationships consciously? This is our model. The first thing is to have clarity. So this is really about articulating and defining very clearly the components of the relationship that you want to have. This is about a vision, either a vision you have for the relationship or even a joint vision with the organization you're having a relationship with, about what we're trying to achieve together. And then defining the other elements of the triangle, the behaviors that we intend to demonstrate, which we call the character, the way we're going to do things, the way we'll resolve problems, the way we're going to reward each other, the way in which we'll behave together in our relationship, not simply in what we'll do. Because so much time, typically in RFPs, in conversations, in selling, in marketing, is all about capability, what we can do and how much we charge for it. Of course, that's very important, but really what makes the difference is in the behavior side of it. And the other side of capability that we think is really important, which I referenced earlier, is not just what we can do, but what we're going to continue to be able to do, our commitment to build trust, because what we're trying to do here with this triangle is build trust, is that we will consistently innovate, we'll come to with new ideas, we will continue to develop our service, our capabilities, so that you don't need to look elsewhere. We're not going to betray trust by being complacent. We're going to continue to deserve trust by consistently seeking to build new ideas. And we're going to articulate that in the clarity piece at the beginning, that this is part of what we promise to do. In return, the customer needs to make commitments. If we're going to co-create this, as Caroline mentioned earlier, this isn't a one-way street, so that we can build value together. We build what we call mutual value, but we can be much more ambitious in what we're trying to achieve. So that's the kind of model. Kevin, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to echo what you said. To me, the opportunity of true partnership is co-creation, is having a shared ambition, and then all of these three things fit. They are a shared activity. Now, that's the ultimate step. The first step is to get, as you've just said, Stuart, clear your character and capabilities for your organization. And that may be your internal organization. One of the things that we see a lot is that this level of relationship doesn't exist internally. So marketing fighting sales, HR feeling like it's an adjunct, IT wondering why people go outside of their strategy. All of these are symbols or signs to us that these three elements of the triangle are not operating. There's not a collaborative internal relationship. But let me now go back to what we asked you to do earlier. What I'd encourage is that we'd like to get you involved in the discussion that says, looking at that piece of paper where you mapped your commodity relationships and perhaps a couple of partner relationships, where were the various strengths and weaknesses against these three characteristics? So look now at your paper, look at some of those and say, what am I strong? We've got poor shared clarity, strong shared clarity. Love to hear some feedback.
Thoughts? What resonates? James, I see you on the call there. If I may invite you. James is the CEO of an agricultural business. In terms of you've obviously got well, talk about your supply chain and your customers. How does this play for you? This model?
Yeah, hi Stuart, thanks for that. Really interesting discussion. Largely driven by the current environment through COVID-19. We are basically a commodity supply business to the food industry, and when I say commodity, focusing on wheat and barley at that level of commodity. So up until very recently, we had been seen very much as a transactional business, and with the high substitution. Given the global impact of COVID-19, suddenly domestic supply, quality and service has come to the forefront of the food industry. And that's allowed us to really use this opportunity, which is why I'm so interested in this seminar, to focus on building partnerships rather than transactional commodity relationships. So it's very relevant. We have got some successes in our setup where we focus very closely on the end customer, that is, from a branded perspective. But we are largely supporting and supplying a significant range of customers who place little value because of the substitution effect on our commodity supply chain.
Let me ask you about this model where you've got these three components. So you've got your capabilities, which in your case you say in many cases may be commodified, although that may be developing. I don't know how much innovation there is. But in terms of the way in which, how does this model land with you as a way of framing the relationship?
Yeah, I love it. I think a big part of the success of delivering this is around character, getting the behavior right, therefore the spirit of the agreement, and the intention there to focus on security of supply, I think has a huge amount to do with it. Capability is significant as well.
Okay,
fantastic. Stuart, we have. I don't know, Julian, if you're able to comment. Julian Gray, you have very many large professional services relationships. I wonder what your thinking would be around this.
Yeah, hi Kevin. Yeah, so I'm Julian Gray. I'm a partner in PwC, and I've worked with Kevin over a number of years. I mean, the whole concept for me of mutual value makes an awful lot of sense. I think the challenge though is there are aspects about the way businesses' performance criteria, both at a sort of an overall organisation level, driven by perhaps market dynamics, but also at individual performance appraisal levels, which sometimes they go at odds with what we believe is the true right thing to do in an environment where we're facing a crisis situation. So the conversation that we're hearing around, you know, speak to your closest, deepen those relationships, use the time that you've got to build those relationships, invest, because that investment relationship is going to pay back, I absolutely sign up to. But you're also faced with a challenge of, certainly in a consulting business, particularly areas of a more jobbing business, where how do you keep the business going, and how do you keep the workforce busy and able to pay them? So that can drive behaviours which are at odds with investing in the relationships, which may be fruitful in the future, but don't perhaps necessarily lead to any monetisation in the short term. So I think it's finding the balance.
That's a terrific point, and a real challenge for so many. And one of the points that we've made previously is that people need to think about the story that they're telling by their current behaviours, and how will that story play out in their future. And we had Philip King, the Small Business Commissioner from government, on last week, and he was saying that he really felt that people had to focus on relationship building as part of the story they wanted to live beyond COVID, and that would be fundamental to their success. But I do see the challenge.
Stuart, just make a point on that. Well, thank you for that, Julian. Tough decisions right now being made by a lot of organisations, and yeah, as Kevin mentioned, we discussed this last week. And just a thought is, even in making those tough decisions, how, if relationship is a key lens through which you're looking about how you communicate those decisions, that you're trying to retain relationship both internally and externally, actually, then that can change at least the tonality of the way in which you do it, if not necessarily some of those decisions. It may even change the decisions you make too, of course. But sometimes it's, you know, you've got to do what you've got to do. But the tonality, the focus on relationship becomes critical in our view. And as Kevin said, we've got this recording from last week you can go to where we talk a lot more detail about the story you're writing. So thank you. We've got time probably for one more very quick contribution. Who wants to add any final thought before we close, because we want to hit timing. Okay, well, thank you. Let me just, if I may, summarize in the minute or so we've got left. What we tried to do, and obviously this is a rapid trot through stuff that can take a lot of time to think about, maybe a day's workshop, whatever it is, but we're trotting through these thoughts to help you think through this and maybe take some of these ideas away. You've got limited amount of relationship capital, particularly right now, because it takes time and money, but also as we emerge into the new normal. What we try to do is share some thinking about how you decide where to invest it, and that trust triangle framing the way in which you do so. And if you look at last week's discussion, we go into a bit more detail about what that means as well. What I like to do is to suggest to you that you think about these. We hope you've taken about at least one great idea away from this discussion, but also if you found this useful, please share the recording, which you'll get a link to in the next 24 hours. Share it with other people you think might find it interesting too, because obviously our goal is to share this thinking as widely as possible. We've got another one of these sessions at 4 o'clock this afternoon. It's still available for people to register if they want to. And next week, we're going to be talking about selling in the new normal, focusing much more on the sales process if you're with this relationship focus. So please do look out for that too and register for that. But finally, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you found that useful, and stay healthy.